Oh. I was looking for you. I was like, where's Viv? Of course, she's right here. Okay, thank you. Stand by for close live for now. Are you ready? Are we on? It's already on. Test, yes. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the first ever Talk20 MHK event. My name is Kayla Savage, and I'm the Education Coordinator at UFM Community Learning Center. We are proud to partner with the Manhattan Public Library to bring this event to the Manhattan community. We are so glad you all are here. Sorry. This event started from a connection that I made a few years ago with Carrie Malou. She is the co-organizer of Talk20 Hutch during a Kansas Big Rule Brainstorm event. The idea was straightforward: finding individuals in the community to share their stories in 20 slides, 20 seconds each, to inspire connection among community members. You may recognize the name Patsy Terrell as the state representative for the 102nd District. She was also Carrie's co-organizer she was also Carrie's co-organizer for Talk20 Hutch, and together they successfully coordinated 7 Talk20 Hutch events. Sadly, Patsy passed away unexpectedly earlier this month. Their enthusiasm, though, for community will continue through the 8th edition of Talk20 Hutch in July at the Hutchinson Public Library. I instantly knew this idea was something that UFM could get behind and something we had to do here in Manhattan. But I knew a partner was key to make this event successful. I would like to personally thank the Manhattan Public Library team for their enthusiasm and hard work, which has made this night possible. Thank you, Vivian and Rana, Deidre, Terry, and Carrie, and also Linda as well. And John, too. Sorry. When you show up, you have to make sure you don't forget somebody's name. We all knew this would be extra work, but we knew it would be a great opportunity for our community. As Manhattan grows, events like this give us the opportunity to create connections with our neighbors, acquaintances, and complete strangers around common topics. We started our conversations in January and pulled this together in just a few short months. I cannot thank them enough. This event would also not be possible at all without the 8 presenters you will hear from tonight. We sincerely appreciate each of them for stepping up and responding to the call for presenters, fearlessly coming along with UFM and the Manhattan Public Library on this journey that is Talk20 MHK. Each presenter is sharing a piece of themselves with you tonight: their passion, their hobby, their project, and their experience. We also want to thank each of you for being here tonight and taking the time to attend. Thank you to those also who are tuning in to the live stream on YouTube. So many people have asked, what is Talk20 MHK? Technically, it's 8 presenters talking for 20 seconds each on 20 slides about their given topic. The broader goal is to create community connection within our community, create connections within our community around those topics and find other topics of interest to our community members. So, if you or someone you know would be a great Talk20 MHK presenter, you're in luck. Our next event will be held January 25th, 2018, and the invitation for presentation proposals is now open on talk20mhk.org. So you're all responsible. We are live streaming tonight's event on YouTube via the Talk20 MHK channel. Video of the presentations tonight will be available on the website as well. There will be time for questions at the end of all the presentations, so please hold your questions until that time. And courtesy of the Manhattan Library Association, there will also be snacks and drinks at the end of the evening, and we encourage you to stick around. So just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Hearing devices are available, so please let a library staff person know if you need one. There are restrooms in the atrium. Please make sure you have your cell phones off or on silent, or we'll send Daniel after you. And make sure you give your undivided attention to each presenter and show your appreciation for them with applause at the end of their presentation. And make sure you hold your questions until the end, because as I said, there will be time for questions at the end of all the presentations. And we'll conclude by 8:30. Thank you again for attending this evening, and we'll now begin the presentations. That's your key. That's your cue. Okay, next slide. I just hit next. Is that right? Next. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Carrie. Whitney Bandel is a new media artist and educator. She works part-time as a professor at both Kansas State University within the art department and Johnson County Community College within web development and digital media. She has a background in K-12 art education and completed research on interactive and digital art as part of her thesis studies. She is passionate about all things arts, crafts, and technology. Whitney Bandel. What happens? It helps if you turn it on. Maybe not. Maybe not. Here we go. We might need your help, Whitney.
Am I going to need to press all of them?
No, you shouldn't need to. Here you go.
All right. I first got interested in STEM. Through my background in K-12 education, and when I was exploring my thesis research in interactive art, I started really looking at the connections between art and technology, and that's how I really first found electronic textiles and the many things that you can do with them. Before I talk about that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what STEM is, and STEM is looking at science, technology, engineering, and math, and it typically is used when focusing on educational policies and curriculum, as well as preparing learners for STEM-related fields where workers are in high demand. So what is STEAM? STEAM takes this idea of adding art and design to STEM and kind of taking it to the next level, whether it's looking at art on its own or using art as a tool for exploring STEM topics, which is really helpful for people who really struggle with science and math. So electronic textiles are textiles that allow for electronic components to be embedded within them. This really helps when working with projects that really explore the human body and the environment in kind of different ways. You can make wearable projects. So usually projects kind of explore two different kind of aspects, either aesthetic or performance enhancing. So they might look more at fashion, how something looks, or it could be looking more at performance, such as with medical equipment, athletic wear, or even the next gadget. You might have seen the like a glove before. But each of these projects are going to have electronic components in them. Usually they're going to start with components that are more basic, like batteries and wires, and then your more advanced projects are going to have, it's going to depend a little bit on the project, but they might have diodes, transistors, capacitors. It really depends on what it is that you really want to make. Now, each project starts off with input. This is going to create a message that gets sent through your circuit. So you can use sensors, which measure information like temperature or light, or you could use a button, which is going to have an off-on type signal that gets sent on through the rest of your circuit. Now, you can use a microcontroller to help change the message within and kind of measure or kind of change the output of it. A lot of times people will use Arduinos or Raspberry Pis. You might be familiar with those. You don't have to use one, but it allows for you to use coding in your projects. And then once you have your message, you're going to finally send it to an output. So your output is going to be how your project reacts. So it could be a light that turns on, it could be a buzzer or a motor that moves. You can even send your signal on to a computer, and then you can have something on the computer react, whether it's a video game, audio, video feedback. Now what makes these projects different is they're going to use textiles. So all the components I talked about can be in any electronic project, but the textiles include conductive fabric or thread, which really allows for the projects to be more flexible. You can wear them, you can have them on your body, and these can act as sensors or buttons or connections. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of different projects. This is a beginner project that just has a power source, so it has the battery, and then it has the output, which is the light. And it's just a bookmark where you're using the conductive thread, and you're stitching your own design and pattern onto this fabric to build a connection to it. This is another really good beginner project that really is a good example of showing a circuit. So in the top right picture is an image of a circuit, but it's not completed. So when the person actually puts the bracelet on, it completes the circuit, and it ends up lighting up. So this is a really good way to even talk about electricity with students, perhaps. And then once you've kind of mastered power and output, then you can start playing with your input. So this has a sensor that's a microphone sensor that you would wear at the top of your tie. It's going to send the signal through an Arduino, and depending on that information, it's going to light up the LEDs on the tie. And you can really personalize your designs. So these are two different skirts that light up different ways. One of them is coded to kind of twinkle at a preset kind of pattern, and the other one uses an accelerometer to measure your movement as you're dancing to actually change how it's lighting up. So you can really kind of put a spin on it. Here's two different controllers that hook up to a video game. Both of them have fabric buttons. You can really add multifunctional aspects, though, because the one on the right, you can actually give someone a massage while you're playing the video game. So a lot of artists kind of play with this and kind of seeing what kind of message you can create. Here's two different musical instruments that, depending on how the person interacts, they play different. So one, you tap a surface, so you're the instrument, and the other one is a portable piano that you can kind of take with you wherever you want to go. So there's a lot of different options that you can do. It's kind of up to yourself to kind of come up with them. So this is a list of resources for where you can buy different components. I prefer SparkFun and Adafruit because they have a lot of really great information for people who are just starting out. They have a lot of tutorials. It's really easy to browse. And they have projects and just kind of everything you need to know to really get started. And this is a list of different resources for learning more. Instructables is a wonderful website for DIY projects, even beyond electronic textiles. And then if you're interested in learning more about coding, you could go to the Arduino website, and they have a ton of example codes. They really walk you through everything. And then if you love books, like we probably all do, this is a list of books that are really helpful. So Electric is a book by one of the leading ladies in electronic textiles. And then Forrest Mims has a really great set of books that really show basic electronic circuitry and just really how to get started. So if you ever want to talk to me more about electronic textiles after this event, you can feel free to email me or check out my website. If you want to talk about STEM or art, I teach traditional art classes and then also electronic, digital media stuff, so even animation or all sorts of other topics. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you for being the brave last name that starts with B, who ended up being first. So we have another B last name following her. Carol Barta has been a lifelong seeker of the theory of everything, which has led her to permaculture, Quaker silence, voluntary simplicity, librarianship, and keeping company with chickens. Carol Barta.
Okay. Let's see. Do I need to push this?
We'll just do this.
There we go. Permaculture is a design science that uses nature as a model for creating productive, resilient, diverse, and stable ecosystems. In the international permaculture symbol, the rainbow snake outlines an egg which contains the tree of life, its roots in the earth, and its crown in the rain, sunlight, and wind. Bill Mollison was an Australian researcher, biologist, and teacher who is referred to as the father of permaculture. He coined the term. It's a portmanteau of permanent and agriculture. Mollison developed this system with David Holmgren, and in 1978, they published their first book, Permaculture 1, which introduced the design system to the general public. The ethics, earth care, people care, and fair share, form the foundation of permaculture design and are also found in most traditional societies. This doesn't mean that we should ignore the teachings of modern times, but in the transition to a sustainable future, we need to consider values and concepts outside the current social norms. David Holmgren has created a series of icons, graphics, and other visuals which portray the ethics and design principles. Permaculture ethics and principles apply to every aspect of human life. This graphic, known as the permaculture flower, shows the evolution of permaculture design through many parts of our culture. The 12 principles of permaculture design guide the process of creating sustainable farms and urban gardens. The ethics remain always at the center of the 12 design principles, ensuring that they are used in appropriate ways. These principles are seen as universal, although the methods used to express them will vary greatly according to the place. Permaculture employs systems of thinking as a tool to examine, systems thinking as a tool to examine and utilize the linkages and interactions between the components of the system. Permaculture is a design science rooted in the observation of natural systems. By taking time to observe and engage with nature, we can design solutions that suit our particular situation. One of my permaculture teachers told me that the hammock is a great tool for a permaculturist because it encourages us to pause and observe. This is design principle 1. Design principle 9 tells us to use small and slow solutions. Starting with small projects is easier to maintain than taking on big ones, making better use of local resources and producing a more sustainable outcome. Don't dig up your whole yard. Soil is the natural capital of the planet. Permaculture focuses on building healthy soil so that it may function as a living system within its ecosystem and land use boundaries. Healthy soil is necessary to sustain plant and animal productivity, maintain or enhance water and air quality, and promote plant and animal health. Perennial plants are ideal for permaculture systems. Less effort, more results. With perennial plants, you plant once and harvest for many years. Think food-bearing trees, shrubs, canes, and ground covers. All of these fruits come from perennial plants, and they're all delicious. Since permaculture design is a design science rooted in the observation of natural systems, biomimicry is a fundamental trait of permaculture installations. Herb spirals, which look a lot like the conch shell in the picture, are one example. Another example might be a low-flow watering system that looks like a watershed. Natural allies in the system do some of the work for you, whether it's pollinating crops or keeping pests under control. Design Principle 5 asks us to use and value renewable resources and services. Pollinators, predatory insects, and even chickens who eat bugs, provide fertilizer, and aerate soil are very useful. A food forest is a system that contains layers of plants, some annual and some perennial, that work together to create a stable, resilient ecosystem. Mollison and Holmgren found forests to be the most fertile and prolific of ecosystems. By creating a food forest, you can ensure ongoing food production with less labor. Permaculture designers use a method called gilding. A guild is a group of plants, trees, animals, insects, and other components that work together to ensure their health and productivity. Instead of simply planting gardens or orchards, permaculture teaches us how to build guilds. This takes the idea of companion planting to a new level. Zoning in permaculture design refers to a method of ensuring that elements are correctly placed for easy access and time of use. Zones are numbered from 0 to 5 and can be thought of as a series of concentric rings moving out from a center point where human activity is needed for a lot of things to where you don't need human activity at all. Wherever possible, make systems efficient. Water catchment above the ground for gravity feed, compost near the garden, shade trees near the house. Stack functions. Make things work for several purposes when possible. This water catchment could be used as a trellis for vining plants. Before you dig, design. Don't carve it in stone, but sketch out your ideas for your site. Once you have observed how sunlight, wind, and water flow over your property, you can get a good idea for how to proceed. Committing your plan to paper is one of the first steps in accomplishing your goals. Learning the skills that will help you develop your permaculture design may take some time to master. Continue to learn and incorporate new ideas that make you resilient when changes come. From having a plan to keeping yourself healthy to being debt-free, permaculture design can help you meet your goals. Sunflower Permaculture is the name of my place. It's an emerging permaculture 1-acre homestead and food forest on Hunter's Island. You can get more information by contacting me at this email, and I also offer classes through UFM, and I actually have one Sunday night.
We may have found the secret to our technology faux pas. Fingers crossed. Susanne is a mother of 3 and a former social worker. She began studying nonviolent communication in 2000 after reading the work of Marshall Rosenberg. She is currently the director of Manhattan Nonviolence Initiative. Susanne is an unwavering optimist and believes passionately that all people can learn to reduce conflict and pain through skilled dialogue. Susanne Glymour.
Oh, you're going to make it go? Okay. Okay. Humans communicate with one another all the time. Communication feels effortless when things are harmonious between people or groups, but even between people who love one another or share a passion about the same interests or causes, disagreement at some point is almost inevitable. Disagreement begins to feel more like conflict when it's not easily or quickly resolved. While we communicate fairly well when it's easy, that is, when there's no disagreement, we rarely communicate well when more serious conflict arises or when conflict becomes protracted. One of the most powerful barriers to peaceful communication is the judgments we make about the other person or people, their intentions, or the situation as a whole. Often we're certain that the other person should not have done or said what they did, and that we have evidence that demonstrates what the other's intentions were. In a conflict, we seek an explanation for how we feel, and we make judgments about who or what is responsible for making us feel that way. Sometimes we blame ourselves, and often we blame others and judge them as being disrespectful, thoughtless, manipulative, greedy, or stupid. The fundamental idea underlying peaceful communication is that all people share some basic human needs and that all communication is an attempt to meet one or more of those needs, no matter how well or poorly it is done. These basic needs are always at work in our lives, and different ones are calling at different times. At any given time, some of our basic needs will likely already be met in some way, while others are not. These unmet needs will deeply affect our experience of a given situation, and it's not unusual for us to be completely unaware of the basic needs that are driving our thoughts and reactions. When our unmet needs remain unidentified to ourselves, the thoughts we think about others directly influence our feelings as a result. If on Tuesday Jane is late for a lunch meeting again, I think, what a thoughtless, disrespectful, and disorganized jerk. I feel irritated, distant, exasperated, or even angry. Those feelings are a window to my unmet needs in that moment. I may be worried about time, have another meeting after this one, or I'm just plain exhausted. My needs may be for control over my time, order in my thoughts or activities, efficiency, or even a basic need for sleep. Interestingly, Jane and I have another meeting on Thursday, and unsurprisingly, Jane is equally late. Today, I think it's great. I'll read my book for 10 minutes, tidy up my notes in my calendar, chat with someone else I know, or even play a quick game of Sol on my phone. Thank goodness Jane is late. I may be feeling cheerful, appreciative, warm, delighted, or relaxed. I may even be grateful. The needs that were unmet on Tuesday are met in other ways on Thursday, so I didn't carry them into my meeting with me. Perhaps my current needs are for relaxation, ease, or even mental space. This example illustrates that poor Jane had very little to do with our thoughts or our judgments about her, nor our feelings about her. Jane is just being Jane. What we're experiencing isn't about Jane, it's primarily about us. Jane did the exact same thing, both times. Our thoughts and our feelings were different because our underlying needs in that moment were different. On Tuesday, we interpreted Jane's behavior negatively through our lens of unmet needs. On Thursday, we interpreted the same behavior as positive because it actually met our needs. Peaceful communication means a greater willingness to listen within ourselves and to extend that willingness to listen to and understand another person. Understanding another person isn't limited to understanding their perspective, but includes how they came to hold that perspective and why it matters to them. In a conflict, willingness to understand another person or their perspective therefore means giving some non-judgmental and compassionate consideration to what unidentified and unmet needs may be at work for them in that moment. Sometimes the balance between authenticity and tact can be a challenge. The difference between authenticity and mere honesty is important as well. Peaceful communication is about speaking powerfully, respectfully, and effectively about difficult subjects or issues, and that includes saying no to harm. It involves speaking clearly about what's going on inside of us in a given situation. Sometimes this means speaking frankly with others, and sometimes an honest internal inquiry is sufficient to help us shift gears. Once we've discovered our own unmet needs, we can think of a whole new set of strategies to meet that need. When I discover that I have a desperate need for 10 minutes of silence, I can actually ask for that and quit screeching at my son for unrelated inconsequentialities. If I have a need for connection, I can reach out to a reliable friend to ask for a few words of comfort and proceed to my next appointment fortified. To discover which unidentified needs are screaming for attention, we do a little digging. We take a look at our judgments, assumptions, and interpretations. We examine our feelings as we think those thoughts. And then we can use those clues to discover which unmet needs are calling at the moment. Now, in conflict, we no longer judge because we know to look for unmet needs first. We recognize that both parties in a conflict have underlying needs that require attention and could be utterly hidden to their owner. We can choose to speak directly about those needs, or we may decide to reflect privately about them. Either way, when we take the time to excavate the unmet needs that are at work underneath the surface conflict, we greatly empower ourselves to take charge of how we react to situations or people. We can interrupt old habits, discard ineffective communication strategies, and we can offer compassion to everyone involved in a conflict, thereby opening the door to greater mutual understanding. Thank you.
Zain Iqbal served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Uzbekistan. Are we out of order? You guys switched places. From 2004 to 2005, where he worked in health and English education. Upon his return to the United States, he has championed the Peace Corps' third goal to help promote a better understanding of Uzbek and Central Asian peoples on the part of Americans by speaking to a wide range of community groups. Zain's formative years have also shaped his understanding of the outside world, having lived in Nigeria, Brazil, and the Netherlands. Most recently, he worked as an English instructor in Saudi Arabia. He now lives in Manhattan and loves working with K-State students and faculty at his job at Hale Library. When he isn't working among books, Zain is seeking adventure in the mountains and deserts of Colorado and his home state of California. Zain Iqbal.
Glad it's chilly in here tonight. Okay. Oh. There's a little bit of...
Oh, no. Microsoft PowerPoint is restarting. Excuse us for an impromptu intermission or something like that. Just stay in your seats. Hold on a second. Carrie?
Exactly. While we're waiting, I just wanted to remind everybody the resources that you see at the end of each presentation, you don't have to try to scribble down. We will make those available on our Talk20 MHK website after the fact, so you can go back and see all of those without having to try to remember on your own, because I sure wouldn't be able to. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, so before talking about my Peace Corps experience, one of the first questions I get is, where is Uzbekistan? And that's a really great question. It happens to lie in the heart of Central Asia, surrounded by many of the other stans that you may know. Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. Uzbekistan is probably most famous for its stunning Islamic architecture, some of it dating back to the 10th century. This mosque in Bukhara, the Po-i-Kalan, was constructed between the 12th and 16th century, and being so far removed from the other side, from the world, even the other side of the world, it feels almost otherworldly in scope. The Kalan minaret, seen in this picture, serves as one example of a piece of architecture that really marvels outsiders, and in fact, the very site of this minaret was marveled in the eyes of Genghis Khan, and he decided to spare the city just before he was about to sack it in 1226. He saw this minaret and said, "I'll save the city." Uzbekistan can be lush and mountainous. This was taken in the Kashkadarya province on a hill near my village. To the west are the Tian Shan Mountains, which make up the frontier between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Uzbekistan has some extraordinary beauty, much of it which is largely unknown to outsiders. That being said, most of Uzbekistan is a desert country, suffering from severe environmental degradation due to cotton farming. This is a shot of a former fishing vessel that once trawled the Great Aral Sea. In the 1960s, the Aral was the third largest inland sea in the world. Due to this cotton farming and overwater use, it has all but evaporated. In Uzbekistan cities, most people live in Soviet-built apartment blocks. In rural areas where I live, villages commonly look like this. Houses are made of a combination of cinder block, brick, or mud. Most families have a space for garden and grazing animals. Indoor plumbing is rare, if not existent, but televisions are ubiquitous. Families are the crucial unit in Uzbek life, and large families are the rule, not the exception. Here, the brother of my host father had me over for dinner with his wife and 3 lovely daughters with the possible intention of wanting to marry me off to the older daughter in blue. I declined. Uzbek families often demonstrate adherence to Muslim traditions, but it's also mixed with Russian modernity. You can see the contrast in this picture, my host mother and my host grandmother. Behind them, though, is my Russified host brother. He was desperate to get to Moscow to start a business. That's what he wanted in life. The best way to hone your language skills in the Peace Corps is to hang out with kids. I learned a lot of my own Uzbek from these 2 boys. This is Sherzad and Bober. In the process, they picked up some English. We would wander around our neighborhood. The Bober would ask me something of the name in English, and I'd in turn ask him about something in Uzbek. And that's how I learned the language. This is a volunteer friend of mine at his health clinic. We were both health volunteers, and we provided basic health education outreach and support for the clinic. Dave's clinic was quite well staffed. It was well attended by his community, although government funds would disappear mysteriously at the beginning of the month due to corruption. When you're a Peace Corps volunteer, a big part of your job, specifically the facilitation of cross-cultural communication and understanding, is happening 24/7. It doesn't let up. And that means you're an honored guest at a lot of weddings. This particular wedding featured 2 brides and then 2 grooms, and I was expected to make a speech. Weddings are common, but funerals also happen as well. Here, a group of Uzbek men, including myself right over there, are preparing a massive cauldron of ash, or rice pilaf, for the guests that were going to come to pay respects to my host father's mother, who had died recently. Rituals include slaughtering a sheep and cooking this ash dish for about 12 hours. Some of the great joys of serving a Peace Corps volunteer is the food, or at very least, learning about different types of food. So Uzbek cuisine is sort of a curious amalgam of dishes native to Russia, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan. Tea is served with all the meals, but vodka is unfortunately an unfortunate vice among the menfolk. This is Ilgiza, my Peace Corps language trainer. These trainers are unbelievably patient, kind individuals who will help guide you through those first rough months of cultural adjustment. They help you learn the language quickly and effectively and serve as a sounding board to hash out potential cultural mishaps and misunderstandings. Because when you arrive in a country, invariably, you stumble upon quirky things that simply don't translate, such as a laundry detergent named barf. But, as it says right under there, barf in Tajik means snow. It says so right in the box. But besides the occasional transliteration mishap, there are countless ways to experience the richness of Uzbek culture. I live close to a textile shop where I could witness the art and science of rug making. You could witness the complete process from silk farming to dye making and seeing it woven on a loom. Cultural experiences also include talking to people you may not otherwise meet. This bearded wise man, as he was called, grew up on a collective grape farm in the Soviet Union. He fought against Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front, returned to run the same farm, and witnessed Uzbekistan's transition to a nominal republic. A fellow volunteer and myself were the first Americans he ever met in 2004. One of the best ways I learned about Uzbekistan was through transportation. So informal cab serves as the best way to get from village to village and town to city, such as this Russian-made Lada. Also, spending 6 hours in a taxi cab, great way to practice your language skills. Chatting with the driver, getting directions, just having conversation. Peace Corps volunteers probably tell you they have a little bit of downtime, which is true. As you can see in this photo, someone decided to catch me during one of those moments. Getting outdoors was important for my personal well-being, so I was fortunate enough to live in an area where there's plenty of opportunity for hiking and exploring, and also meeting local Uzbeks who I would chat with and just enjoy hanging out with. This is the UNESCO World Heritage Site of the Registan in Samarkand, one of the most profound examples of Islamic architecture in the world. Peace Corps gave me a chance to live some of the dreams I had as a child and to see and better understand the world. and to be a conduit of understanding for others who may want to do the same thing someday. And for that, I'm forever grateful for my experience in Uzbekistan. Thank you.
That's sort of daunting, you know, like very intimidating, Daniel. Okay. Daniel Ireton is an associate professor at Kansas State University Libraries, working largely with reference and instruction for students and faculty studying the arts and humanities. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Theater from Kansas State University and a Master's of Library Science from Emporia State University. His own research has involved superheroes, alternate reality games, religious aspects of books, and of course, history. He's very excited to talk to the community about his nightlife.
The best part about that joke is I wrote it and made her say it. Oh, that's all right.
Your armor is...
Oh. Okay, so I'll be talking tonight about armazzare, which is Italian for the art of arms, which is a martial system developed by Fiore della Barri in the late 14th, early 15th centuries. This is an image of our own school, which is here in Manhattan, the Broken Arm Academy of Swordsmanship, of which I am a senior student. This falls broadly under historical European martial arts, or HEMA, which is reconstructing a variety of techniques from various cultures from that European medieval era. It is both a sport, a martial arts pursuit, as we can see here, using modern equipment. It is also a living history scholarship. Here we have myself and a number of colleagues participating in a tournament of arms and getting a picture at the castle, which is in the Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. So we are researching both the materiality of history and the martial systems. Now, what it's not, what HEMA is not, is can be perhaps best explained by things that are closely associated, but not quite the same thing. This is gentlemen in the Society of Creative Anachronisms, which is using its own sort of sportified system. It's also not LARPing, which is live action role playing, something you may have heard of. This is using a very gamified system to simulate mass battles using typically foam weapons, but not necessarily with an eye towards actual history involved. So this is decidedly a scholarly and intellectual pursuit as well as a martial one. Now, Fiore della Barri, this is an imprint from one of his original manuscripts that are still surviving. He was the practitioner of this art in his time, and then had a very successful school. Several copies of it, as I said, still exist, and it was compiled by this gentleman, Robert Charette, who I've had the pleasure to meet and fight at a number of events. This is the textbook that my own school uses, armazzare, the chivalric martial arts system of Fiore della Barri, and it is very systematic, and he has taken these various copies and compiled it in such a way. Now, this is not the only surviving tradition. This is the most popular one out of Italy. There are German traditions surviving, Lichtenauer and Tollhofer, which offer similar styles, but with very pointed stylistic differences for those that know where to look for them. There are also some surviving English traditions, George Silver and Zach Wilde, who has about the best name for a sword fighter that I've ever heard. Though these are from a slightly later period, they do build upon some of the same techniques that would have come before, using slightly different weapons. Weapons in particular, of course, the most famous is the long sword, pictured here. This would have been used both in and out of armor by knights and men-at-arms. It was the most stereotypical sidearm used for cutting and thrusting, and is the bulk of our tradition. Of course, daggers are kept as a sidearm for pretty much any man-at-arms, and whatever sort of stylistic bout that we're doing. Typically, daggers are kept as a sidearm and sometimes do come out, as a lot of it does involve very close fighting in some circumstances. So very useful there. We also do traditions with spears. This is very similar to some of the techniques that are used with a sword, just with a greater reach, although, of course, getting too close is a greater risk when you come to spear fighting. Typically, these would be have a butt spike as well as a thrusting tip at one end. And then the weapon of choice among armored men-at-arms would have been the poleaxe, whereas a long sword is not going to be effective against a man in a harness, such as this. A poleaxe is going to either punch right through or damage it despite that. So it's, our head instructor refers to it as the medieval can opener. We gather for deeds of arms. This is a picture at a very recent deed of arms that I was at. I'm not pictured here. I was overheating and had to get out of my armor after a couple of days of fighting. But these are gentlemen and ladies from several states that gathered to participate in this. In these tournaments, we have what we call Blossfechten, which is German for shirt fighting. This is unarmored, and you can see in this bout ended with a double crotch shot. This is myself and my friend Danielle. In circumstances like that, no one actually wins. Everyone's a loser here. This is my friend Jessica Finley, who runs her own school. She used to operate a school very close by out of Topeka, but has since moved on to another state. And you can see there's a lot of care that goes into this. She is what we call Kappa PA here, although she's not wearing her gauntlets at the moment in this image, which is head to foot, fully encased in steel. Harnischfechten, armored fighting, is sort of the premier events that happen at these tournaments. Here, Jessica and my friend Bruce have been fighting with spears. You can see here she's dropped her spear to get in close and has jammed her dagger into his oculara, so scoring a point by stabbing him in the eye. Harnischfechten also uses what we call a half-sword technique a lot of times. So you can see here these two gentlemen are gripping their swords both at the hilt and further up along the blade. This is because, as I said, a thrust or a cut at the plate doesn't count for a point. You have to exercise greater control to get in between the plates. Here, in this bout, an awful lot of matches do end with grappling, and here I have thrown my friend Nick to the ground and am offering a hand back up again. Grappling does enter in a lot of it and is actually one of the bases for most of these martial systems. So thank you for letting me introduce you to this today. These are all the various schools and friends of schools that lent images and are options for you, including locally, I'll mention again, Broken Arm Academy of Swordsmanship. We're on Facebook. Sundays at 3 is when we usually practice. So thanks very much.
Brandon Irwin is originally from Sherburne, New York, and after several stops along the way, is currently living in Manhattan, Kansas, where he is assistant professor of kinesiology at Kansas State University. He is the director of the Healthy Communities Laboratory, where he collaborates with a diverse set of university and community partners to study and improve community health. He is also a member of the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, a group of health-oriented organizations in the community who seek to create a healthy community for all. He also dedicates much of his time to the MHK Making Change Affordable Housing Community Action Group, studying the local issue of affordable housing and working collaboratively with community partners to make housing affordable for everyone. He currently lives in a tiny house on wheels just outside of Manhattan with his dog, Jimmy. Brandon Irwin.
Come on.
Sorry. Just kidding. Okay. Sorry. Let me get here. I'm always doing updates. I swear. Slideshow. Okay, let me find you. Brandon, here you are. I'm here. Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I did. But you're ready. Go. You don't have to push anything.
Oh, well, I don't have anything to say for that one.
It'll
Wait a
time.
minute, wait a minute. This is not.
It's not it.
It's not it. It's not it. You want to skip me?
No, not really.
I have mine on my
Okay.
I have it on my hand.
Flash drive. Okay.
Can you do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Bear with us one more moment, dear. Just end it and we'll get back into it. No worries.
Okie dokes, I think we're good. So as you're probably aware, last year my friends and I built a tiny house, and as a scientist who thinks a lot about public health, I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between tiny houses and health. And over the next 6 minutes, I really want to try to convince you that tiny houses are a way that we can improve community health here in Manhattan. Now, zip codes were originally designed to help get mail to where it's supposed to go, but what we can do now is use zip codes to predict how long people live. In fact, if you go down to Kansas City, one area, life expectancy in one zip code is 83 years. About 5 minutes up the road, it's 14 years less. Now, if we visit all the places around the world where people have the highest life expectancy, we find that these people have some things in common. They tend to eat plant-based diets, they get lots of natural movement, they're very socially connected, and they have a very clear, well-articulated life purpose. But we also know that there's a lot of other things that working behind the scenes that influence health, such as you see here. Now, as you can see, there's quite an array of things, including diet and exercise, but lots of other things, like education, income, family, housing, all of which influence health. So today we're going to talk about housing. And housing impacts your health in a lot of different ways. You know, how and what your house is built out of, the location of your home, how many people you live with, the quality and design of your neighborhood, and as you might suspect, how affordable your house is. And for many people, when housing costs more than about 30% of your income, there are consequences. People may be forced to make choices between paying rent and putting food on the table. They have less money to spend on the health care that they need. They're more stressed and isolated. Two things that we know are really important for people's health. And there's a good chance that either you or someone you know is feeling this burden. The U.S. is in the middle of a rental housing crisis, and Riley County is affected by this. And it has among the highest rate of severe housing problems in the state of Kansas, nearly double the state average. And our low-income folks, including students, have pretty much always felt this burden. But now that burden is starting to creep up into higher income earners. In fact, since 2007, the proportion of people with moderate incomes who are cost burdened has increased 5-fold. And at this point, one thing that I want you to notice is that the answer to this health problem is not to call your doctor. Okay? I want to suggest to you that tiny houses are part of the solution to that problem. And when I say tiny house, I'm talking about a house that's less than 400 square feet, It could be on a foundation or it could be on wheels. Are they affordable? Let's run through some numbers here, some fairly conservative numbers. If you're an investor and wanted to build one in your backyard and rent it out, you could reasonably expect to get around a 9.5% return on investment. Now, there's plenty of room to play around with those numbers, but let's just carry on with the ones that you see here. Based on those numbers, anyone making at least $30,000 a year could afford your rent at 30% of their income. Two individuals making less than $30,000 could afford that, and assuming the tiny house is in your backyard, you have the added benefit of having a better relationship with your tenant, and vice versa. Let's also consider the cost of the alternative here. In this case, a standard size home. For the price of a standard size house in Manhattan, you could buy 8 tiny houses built by a professional. If you did it yourself, you could build 16 tiny houses. You could even build 11 tiny houses and fit them inside of one regular size house. It's also worth noting that people who are not tied down with debt and who own their homes tend to be healthier and contribute more economically and socially to their communities. People living in tiny houses are half as likely to have a mortgage than the average US homeowner and 15% more likely to own their homes. Now, tiny houses are a way to live a simpler life, and that comes with a long list of potential health benefits. Of course, the financial benefits are really important here. From my experience, I've come to really value the freedom and even serenity that comes along with this lifestyle and being able to spend my time doing the things that I like doing. Tiny houses also connect families, and housing for seniors is a top priority in Riley County. And the price tag on independent and assisted living communities is out of reach for a lot of people. And so tiny houses are an affordable alternative that keeps families together and creates spaces for independent living. And in many cases where the cost of housing is just too far out of reach for some communities, communities are taking matters into their own hands and working together to build tiny houses and tiny house villages even, offering people in their communities a safe and dignified place to live, work, and play. And for those reasons, communities all over the country are going tiny. People are looking for ways to live a simpler, healthier, more affordable life. And cities are trying to find creative ways to meet the needs of their residents. And there's really no reason why that can't happen here. We have the space for it. And when used as a strategy to fill in empty lots and backyards, tiny houses can bring people together and give people better access to the goods and services that they need. In fact, the main goal of our city, the city of Manhattan, is to encourage infill and density, making tiny houses a really great solution to meet that need. In fact, anyone who wants to build a tiny house on a foundation in Manhattan, in certain places, you can do it today. You can also build one on wheels and live out in Riley County, which is where I live, and where 3 other people in tiny houses on wheels live. So I want to leave you with this. The power of community to create health is far greater than any physician, clinic, or hospital. We're all connected, and so too is our health. And whether you're an investor or a renter, young or old, or someone who just cares about the community and improving community health, I hope I've at least convinced you to consider the possibility that tiny houses might be a viable strategy for improving our community and creating our own health. Thank you.
Marcia Rozell loves the outdoors. Growing up, she was constantly exploring outside. As an adult, she knows the value and joy of restoring her soul by getting outdoors. Just ask her about her trip she just got back from. For the last 8 years, one of her favorite ways is paddling in a kayak. Come listen and learn how to become active for yourself on our Kansas waterways. Marcia and her husband, Tim, have made Manhattan their home for the last 20 years. Their 2 college-age kids love the outdoors too. Marcia serves as president on the USD 383 School Board, as well as serving on the Kansas Canoe and Kayak Association and Friends of the Kaw boards. Her daytime job is in tourism. She just got here from Stampede today, promoting the city she loves. Marcia Rozell.
Yes, forgive my attire because country stampede. Okay. So paddling in the outdoors is something that's very dear to my heart. I give all the credit to my brother. Sorry. That's okay. We can do a selfie right now. I know what I'm doing.
Oh, do a selfie with the group. Yay.
You guys are all in it. Wait a minute.
Yay.
Okay, ready?
Let's try this again. So you got another, restart.
That's fine.
Okay, let me find you here. And then we'll get you. There you are. Okay. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure. Go.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I am glad everybody's here tonight, too. It's great to see such a great audience, and I'm going to live in a tiny house someday. And you'll get that when you see my car in the picture, too. So, love paddling in the outdoors. I give all the credit to my brother. He was my big brother, and it was because of his Boy Scout troop that I started paddling in Missouri on the Current and the Jack Fork rivers. And again, we were outside all the time, and yes, this is a 67 Mustang that I wish I still had. So my first kayak I purchased here locally because I work for the chamber. It's always great to purchase local. And it was at the Pathfinder. This is an Old Town Durango. It was about $1,000. And it's a touring kayak. And I can handle it by myself, which is part of why I liked it. Because a lot of times after work, I'm out on Tuttle Puddle paddling. The rest of the time, I'm taking my dog with me, who does ride point. She's a Border Collie. She's 12 years old, and she's more active than most 2-year-olds. And this is on the Kansas River, which, by the way, I'm paddling Sunday. If anybody wants to paddle with me, we're going out again. This is the Kansas Canoe and Kayak Association, and I recommend anybody get on our website or Facebook page and see that we paddle multiple times throughout the year. We're welcoming to anybody that wants to join us. It's a $15 membership, but honestly, you can come anytime and join us. So, great group of paddlers. I've learned tons from them. We also have the Kansas Paddling Book, which we offer on our website, and I'm going to make sure the library has a copy if it doesn't already, so you can check it out. It's got 61 paddles throughout the state of Kansas, and it's a great way to, get the details of how to get to portages and to boat ramps. This is my second boat, the blue one. It is a whitewater boat. It's one I found for just $100 on Craigslist. And I actually have resold it because we don't have any whitewater in Kansas. And when I resold it, I bought this kayak. It's a sea kayak. It's real streamlined, real fast. When I purchased it, I realized I could not take it on my Mustang. So my husband found this little Mini Cooper, and yes, it's twice as long as the Mini Cooper. But it's great, it's sleek, it's a little heavier, and it's got wheels that I can get it down to the river. This is a picture of boats with my paddling friends. They all had the sea kayaks, and I had that touring kayak, and so I was like this big tugboat, and they were these streamlined ones. But we go constantly all over the state. We've been to Council Grove. Wilson Lake is probably one of my cleanest favorite ones. I'm part of Friends of the Kaw. I sit on their board, and it's a great advocacy for clean water in Kansas. They have about 12 paddles a year, too, so if you want to get involved with them, they're a nominal fee to get on and paddle with us. One of the great resources they do have is the website, which allows you to check water flow. This is critical when you're doing the Kansas River. It's also known as the Kaw River. And so you can check how much water is getting out of Milford or Tuttle Creek and that. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, the water's really high right now. So I've also organized the Real Paddle Film Festival. This was down at the Discovery Center. We held it for 2 years. It was a genre of watching films to get people excited about paddling in Kansas, and it really did that. We're looking to bring the Wild and Scenic Film Festival here next year with Friends of the Caw. So, at my office, Visit Manhattan, I worked with the Manhattan Parks and Rec office and Tuttle Creek State Park, and we decided we'd put on the Little Apple Paddle. And the four of us that were part of this group thought if we could get 50 people, we would feel like it was a success. We had 110. When we wrapped up the meeting afterwards and thought about what went well, what didn't go well, we came up with the Little Apple Glow Paddle. This one just went from one boat ramp in Manhattan to the other, but at night. We thought, okay, maybe if we have 10 people join us, and we had 35. From there, we planned the next year to have 3 paddles. The first one was going to be an overnighter. This was supposedly go to Junction City to Ogden, spend the night on a sandbar. You cannot sleep off the river. You have to sleep on a sandbar on the Kansas River. And then come down into Manhattan and, of course, have breakfast or that. This is last year's Little Apple Paddle. It grew from the 110 to 256. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. We did have fire on the river, so we were safe. I'm sorry, fire department on the river. We didn't have a fire. And our Glow Paddle this year had 113 people. It's amazing. Yeah, this is him right here. He took the picture. So, and that night, a couple of my friends, after we did the s'mores, we went back and slept on a sandbar. So we're trying to arrange a time where we can actually go from Junction City all the way to Kansas City, sleeping on sandbars overnight. The library has great resources for paddling. This is a book of 50 places you should go before you die. I've got about 3 of them checked off. I recommend going with groups. It's always best. One of my favorite rivers, I get asked this all the time, is the Buffalo River in Arkansas. I've done 2 different stretches, 2 different times with my family, and I plan to do the whole river by the time I'm 60. As Kayla mentioned, I did just get back from an incredible trip. I went up to the Boundary Waters. This was something that I've had on my bucket list for a long time. This is not a picture of it, but if you get on my Facebook page, there's 350 really good pictures. And it was up in the Quetico, and I went with 8 other people. I didn't know any of them, but I had the time of my life, and they are now fast friends, and I can't wait to go back. So please talk to me. I'd love to talk to you about paddling.
Doug Tippin is a retired social studies teacher and coach from USD 383. He has 2 degrees from Pittsburgh State University. Following early retirement, he worked in the College of Education at Kansas State University, supervising student teachers. For a number of years, he has been researching the military road that went from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Riley, Kansas during the 1850s and 1860s. Currently, he is placing markers in 5 counties to describe the road. Doug Tippin.
Well, good evening. The Military Road Project is an ongoing project that we've been working on for a number of years. Hope to complete placing the markers this year. We've got about 4 more to go. And what you're looking at is Old Bill. We place that on every marker, and that, of course, is the logo of Fort Riley. Fort Leavenworth is named after Brigadier General Henry Leavenworth. And he was very important in the early years in helping settle some of the Native American problems in the Mississippi River and Missouri River areas. Fort Riley is named after General Bennett C. Riley, and he was active in the American-Mexican War and also had some activities going on in the state of California. And of course, there are a lot of things in our area named after him. The military road went from Fort Leavenworth southwest towards Topeka, then joined up with the Oregon Trail. It crossed, went into the area of St. Mary's, Kansas, and to the Oregon Trail Nature Park that a lot of you have been to. We have a marker there. Then there was the Vermilion River to cross, and Louis Vu, who was a Potawatomi French person, had a business there. He charged $1 a wagon. Some days there were as many as 300 wagons that went across, so that was pretty good income for that time. There's a view of the Vermilion River today. There's a cemetery close by where the Vu family is buried. That's in Potawatomi County. Then it went from there southwest across Potawatomi County to the town of Louisville, and Rock Creek is located there. And there was a natural limestone base there that they could cross, and we have placed a marker there. These show some of the swales. A swale is a depressed area that was formed by the wagons and the animals, and you almost have to be in a pasture to find those. If it's a plowed field, of course, they're all gone now. Here's a real good swale where the little trees are. This is northeast of St. George, facing southwest, and you don't find many swales like that left anymore. Now, they went into the St. George. This was a branch off of the main trail, and we think the reason they went to St. George was to get fresh water at Blackjack Springs, which is still flowing in St. George. From there, they perhaps went north on Blackjack Road to get on the main military trail, or perhaps they came up Old Highway 24, which is now called the Military Trail Road. They came to the Elbow Creek. That's just off of Green Valley Road. And that was a difficult crossing because there was a sharp turn there, and it was fairly steep going up the bank. Now, the original trail went farther north up on the ridge, kind of parallel to the Blue River. And it crossed the Blue River about 5 miles north of Manhattan at a little town called Gianetta, which is no longer there. And there are still some remnants of that crossing. Originally, it was a ferry. Then the government built a bridge, and it was washed out. And after it was washed out, then they changed the location of it. And that's when the main trail then came into the east side of Manhattan. And it came into where the American Legion is. That area was called Pittsburgh Landing. And of course, the drainage ditch that you see there was the Blue River at that time. And that's at the end of Kearny Street. So that was the first crossing of the Blue. And later on, they moved it south to the end of Points Avenue. It came up Points Avenue, and this is a marker in the southeast corner of the city park right across from the city hall. So 11th and Points is where this was located. This is a scene from 1863 showing wagons coming up Points Avenue. And as you look in the background, that's the Blue River. So a little bit of change, Manhattan now in 1863. Then it went down across where Theodore Roosevelt School is, Long's Park, eventually going around the south part of the hill there, and crossed Wildcat Creek, entered Warner Park, right behind where Arby's is located now. This was the very first marker that we put up several years ago. This shows the trail up in Warner Park, and all this area was cleared years ago by Don Combs, who passed away a couple years ago. and he spent many, many hours clearing that out. So a lot of people use that trail today. Then it went up into Miller Ranch, and we have 2 markers up there. And of course, that's all a housing area at the present time. So that area has all been destroyed as far as any swales or anything. And from Miller Ranch, it went down a steep incline into Eureka Valley and then on to Fort Raleigh. And we could not have done this project without the help of Beyer Construction. And Burke Beyer provided the heavy equipment. Those markers weighed 4.5 to 5 tons each, so it took some big equipment to place them. And if any of you are interested in this, I've got some maps over here to show the entire military road from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Raleigh. So thank you very much.
All right, folks, we'd like everybody to stay and have our presenters kindly turn their chairs around so that we can pass the microphone to them, and we'll also have a microphone available for the audience, too. Do we have a separate microphone for them? Okay. Oh, yes. And don't leave without cookies or drinks, too, before as well. Okay. Okay, so if you have a question, Rana right here has the microphone, and then I'm going to pass the microphone on to our lovely presenters.
First, I want to thank everyone. I think I have at least one question for all of you, but I'm going to just pick one, and that is my millennial son is passionate about tiny homes, and he's finding a real pushback from people in charge of zoning. And can you explain what the situation is in Manhattan as far as that goes? Thanks.
Sure. So I take it from what you just said that they're trying to build inside of city limits. Is that right?
In Los Angeles.
Oh. Well, the general lay of the land with zoning is pretty much wherever you are, if you're in a city. Inside a city, is the lowest hanging fruit that exists for getting a tiny house built and living in a tiny house is as an accessory dwelling unit, right? An accessory dwelling unit, you see them in Manhattan, right? Like they could be a apartment over somebody's garage, right? Detached from the main dwelling. It could be a granny pod if anybody's ever heard of those things. Right, a little cottage in the backyard. Those are accessory dwelling units. And in any zone where those are approved, I don't know the exact language of what that zone is. I think it's a little bit different depending on where you are. That is sort of like the green light for a tiny house. And again, you can do that in Manhattan. The place where you run into issues within city limits in almost every place in the country except for a few is when the tiny house is on wheels. If it's on wheels, we don't really have a building code to define what that thing is, because it looks like an RV, right? It's on wheels, but yet you're living in it year round, right? But in most places you can't live in an RV within city limits, and it's a seasonal dwelling. So when you build it on wheels, it just throws a wrench into the situation there. But I would say look into accessory dwelling units.
Okay, this is kind of a follow-up question. So how does it work where you're living out in Riley or outside of Manhattan in Riley County? Like, what do you have to buy a piece of land and then have your tiny home on it, or?
That is an option. Yeah, you can do that. I personally don't. I actually live in the River Chase Mobile Home Park, and that's that's outside of city limits, and it's in Riley County. There's 2 other tiny houses on wheels in there, and it's just because they have a slightly more lax building code, right? Building code laws. So that's also doable. But again, you could buy a piece of land out there and talk to the folks in the county to figure out exactly where you'd be able to put it.
My question is for Doug. You said you have 4 markers left to place, and I was just wondering how much each of those markers cost and if you already have the money collected for all of those.
Okay, the stone markers that you saw there on the screen, those cost approximately $5,000 each. The bronze plaque was 24 inches by 24 inches. That costs a little over $2,000. And for the ones in Raleigh County, we have 10 in Raleigh County, and that money all came from private donations and banks and families and so forth. And then we've had to kind of change our plan after Mr. Combs passed away. So in the counties east of us, I've developed another type of a marker. It's stainless steel with 2 legs on it that goes in the ground. And the plaque is, the script is 24 by 24. We fasten on this stainless steel marker. Those run around $300. And the DAR has been very helpful in various counties to help pay for them. Leavenworth County's completed, Shawnee's completed. There's 5 in Potawatomi County with about 3 more to go. And I'm currently working on Jefferson County. We want to place 2 in Jefferson County at Ozaki and Winchester, hopefully. So considerably cheaper with the stainless steel.
Hello. I had a question for Susanne. And so with your concept of, peaceful communication, I couldn't help but think of the concept of sea lioning, or like asking questions and pretending to be very sincere in these questions, but they're only meant to be like wearing down the person. So for example, with LGBTQ issues, like you can have someone ask like, what's transgender? But then they keep asking questions to try and make you sound like you have to dig up all this information. So how do you deal with sea lions?
I have never heard of that term before, sea lions. That's interesting. The idea about peaceful communication includes having an integrity of intention. So if you're practicing your own peaceful communication, it's important for you to focus on your own intentions. If you are met with someone who is sea lioning, is that what you say? I don't know. Part of peaceful communication is learning how to hear behind what may be going on with that person, that they're behaving in whatever way they're behaving, that they're speaking in the way that they're speaking. And there are tools for that, tools for how to listen differently and in turn ask questions about what may be going on in that communication.
Let's get someone else first.
Okay. Now? Okay, Zain, Carol, and all 3 of you, and Brandon. Describe some of the most exciting, innovative places you've been that give people of modest income an opportunity to dwell in a shared circumstance in a beautiful environment. And I know, Carol, you've got some, but I want to hear from Zain too, because I think you were in a novel situation as far as how people occupy space, families or whatever.
Actually, Carol.
Okay. I can go on a long time. There are a number of what you might call eco-communities or intentional communities around the country, and I've had the great pleasure of having visited some of them. I think my very favorite one, because they do a lot of permaculture there, is Dancing Rabbit, which is in a little town called Rutledge, Missouri. And there are actually 3 intentional communities there: Dancing Rabbit, Sand Hill, and Red Earth. They each have a different model of governance, and their goal is to give people a place to develop new ways of living on the earth without taking up. In fact, they have a very small, I think their Dancing Rabbit says their carbon footprint is about 1/10 of the others. Zain?
So just from my experience in Uzbekistan, just to give you context, the village I lived in was about 500 people. The host family that I lived with was there was a father and mother. There were 4 kids. The grandparents both lived with us until the grandmother passed. The brothers lived a house down. Another brother lived 2 houses down. If I wanted to go to dinner, I could go to dinner at any of these places, these houses, and I could really just knock on the door. And I did have, being the person who was the clear foreigner, it was welcoming, but they do have a strong guesting culture there. And I could really walk in, and they would treat me as if I was one of their own. I thought it was interesting to experience that, because from my experience living here in the United States, there's a process. You call someone, you email them, you set up plans. There's among close friends you can drop in, but even that is becoming, I think, it's becoming less common these days. In Uzbekistan, even to this day, I still have friends who say, come over, stay for 2-3 months, it doesn't matter. Now, I think culturally it's different, but it is fascinating to take part in an experience like that.
So I would just second what Carol said about the intentional communities. I just went to one eco village at Ithaca in Ithaca, New York, and that's a great place, and you can look that up online to learn more about that. I guess I would just add to what's already been said by saying that, and the only thing you really have to do first is just make an assumption that the size of a house or a dwelling is related to the cost of that dwelling. And there's going to be exceptions to that, if you're living in a country like Japan where it's, overcrowded or something like that. But so where have I been where I've seen, housing described in the way that you just described it? Well, Europe is a pretty good place to find that. I did a backpacking trip a couple of years ago, 45 days, 8 countries. I was in the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, some other ones. and what you find there is people are living a lot smaller. And in fact, the United States on average has the second largest house sizes on the planet, only behind Australia. Everybody else, and I'm not talking like Japan, like these crowded countries. I'm talking like, South America, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, where you can spread out. The average house sizes in those places are at least, in most cases, half the size of what they are here. And so again, if you just take this assumption that the size of the house is correlated with how much it costs, there's some digging to be done here, but my hunch is that it's going to be quite a bit more affordable in those places, and certainly living a little bit more simply.
Hi, my question is to Daniel. You say you practice HEMA, which is Historic European Martial Arts, and I would like to know, how do you transfer this knowledge and what you have learned of this medieval times and the codes? How do you transfer that knowledge into your everyday
You don't need to flirt with me. We're already married. Well, let's see. I mean, I guess I could talk about like everyday benefits to it. It does. I mean, there's of course the knowledge itself, the knowing the history. I started doing this in a sense as a way of getting in shape. I don't really care for exercise, but the idea of wearing armor and getting into fights appealed to me, and I thought if I did that, I would sort of exercise by accident by also doing this. I mean, it was very much a fitness thing. You know, you practice any sort of martial art, and I've done a few, and it does have a calming effect, I guess, in a sense. There's things that are not quite as intense as a fight sort of have the volume turned down a little bit. So it is, I guess, a stress relief in that sense. And I mean, there is a sort of bearing you gain from it, I suppose, because you're reading about, you know, and it's well known that the sort of chivalric ideal that was produced from this time, it was not practiced widely. It was, people were kind of as awful at that time as they are now, but it was at least an ideal to aspire to, and having, you know, sort of a connection with that aspirational ideal, you know, it can help in, you know, how you approach life, I suppose.
Okay, I have two quick notes. One, yes, the book Paddling Kansas is available for you at Manhattan Public Library. And two, we probably have time for one more question. Okay.
One more question for our knight. How do you keep from hurting each other with those weapons?
Oh, well, sometimes we do. I mean, they're made of steel. Well, I mean, I suppose with that, there are certain practices that we go into performing with it. The sword that I brought tonight, this is what we call a fetishvat, or a feather sword. It's flexible, it's lighter. This is actually designed for combat out of armor, but still with the protective padding. I mean, the armor will stop quite a lot. You can see there's this is actually, the tip is from a walking stick that was adapted and placed on the end of it. And we, you know, even though it's blunted, an actual bared thrusting tip would be pretty dangerous. So we have this to sort of serve as a stop point. Of course, the armor itself does help. I mean, there is a field marshal on hand. There are rule sets that we adhere to, because we want to simulate killing each other without actually hurting each other. And it's, I mean, but in that sense, though, it's as safe as any other sort of martial arts practice. You've got coaches, you've got training, you have, you know, some emergency medical, there's medical kits on hand at any of these events. I think what happens more than anything else that I've seen has been broken fingers from strikes to the hand, but I haven't seen anything more severe than that. The picture that I had in the scene where my friend Jess is stabbing my friend Bruce in the eye, we'd make some certain modern, we sort of acquiesce to modern safety in some instances, giving way to perfect historical accuracy. Because while that would be like an open eye slit in an actual historical recreation, there's a shield of perforated plate behind any kind of opening in helmets. So there's simply no way for that to actually penetrate and cause any actual harm. So it's through rules. We're not swinging for the fences, I guess I should say too. We're practicing good technique, but you can practice good technique without swinging as hard as you can. And in fact, swinging as hard as you can your technique is going to get sloppier, and you're more likely to be scored on by your opponent. So I guess there's a number of sort of safety precautions in place, and it's much like any other sport, really, in that sense.
Okay, can we please have another round of applause for our presenters? Thank you. Okay, and you all have their contact information via our website, talk20mhk.org. Again, January 25th, 2018 is our next event. So get those presentation proposals in via our website. And please grab a cookie or something to drink on your way out, and feel free to ask individual questions to the presenters as well, while you've got them at your will, I guess. Sort of. Thank you again.